Well, I'm just going to tell them what it is.
Yeah, of course.
So do you with music?
Yeah.
So this is Chet Baker. And I guess I should talk over him. You can turn it down. So that's Chet Baker. And what that is the soundtrack for my book. Because there's 8 stories in the book. It's called The Man with 8 Pairs of Legs. And there's 8 stories. And 6 of them have music directly in them. You know, like Chet Baker's in Thunder in Illinois, the second story. And the first one was a John Denver song that's in Title's Way, the first story. And so on. So there's one for each story. And there's such a variety because there's an Armenian duduk for Tasmanians. There's an opera from Bellini for the overture story. And then there's Diana Ross. You know, usually when you hear that, you just go around. Because that's from a 1965 period piece on the beach of Santa Monica, and so on. So I just wanted to know. So I just had to hear. She was hoping that we'd come out on the most, but it didn't. So we did this special taste.
Yeah, I can also put the link on our YouTube when we
Yeah.
so we can put that into the description. So we can see the stickers on my laptop. Well, welcome everyone to Roundabout Books Author Night. I'm Julie, I'm the events manager here, and I just want to thank everyone for being here on a warm spring evening. How dare you? So just a quick reminder about some of our upcoming events. Next Thursday, Carolyn Wood will be in the store to discuss her new book, Class Notes, about the summer she spent in Martha's Vineyard with the Kennedys right after Robert F. Kennedy was assassinated. Very interesting. And then on April 30th, we're having our official store relaunch, and from 12 to 2 that day, we're going to have 6 Oregon authors in here, spread out at different tables. We're calling it Speed Date with an Author. So you can stop by, they'll have a minute or 2 to tell you about their book and decide if you want to take one home. Again, though it's our relaunch, it's Independent Bookstore Day, we're going to have tote bags and freebies and all kinds of fun stuff that day, so come by. So tonight, we are joined by Ellen Santasiero, who is the editor of Placed, an encyclopedia of Central Oregon, and also Just Say Yes to Life in the Stroke Awareness Oregon organization. Yeah, SAS. And then Leslie Kirk Campbell, author of The Man with 8 Pairs of Legs and winner of the Mary McCarthy Prize in short fiction. So real quick, one of the blurbs on this book, which is amazing, from Alice Sebold, author of The Lovely Bones, says, smack in the middle of our chic contemporary postmodern fog, Leslie Kirk Campbell commits the greatest impossible. She refuses to place intellect over emotion. In doing so, she speaks depth instead of dazzle, sentiment in place of cynicism. Without sacrificing the intelligence and writerly skills it takes to do justice to her compelling material, time and again, Campbell leads us to the murk of mere innovation, the fetish of the new, and into the light of true feeling. As a result, this story is owned me, body, and soul. This is the sort of fiction I look forward to taking into the long night. So without further ado, welcome everybody, and thank you.
She was in trouble.
Hopefully I projected enough.
All right. You guys hear me? Yes?
Can you hear me?
Now we can.
Okay, good. All right.
Is it much better with the mic?
Yeah.
With the mic?
That's better. Because it's a big space.
Yeah, yeah. All right. So I will also say welcome and thank you everybody for coming. I'm just going to say a few words about Leslie's collection before she reads from one of the stories. This is a fabulous book, you guys. This is so good. I'm a writer, a teacher of writing, and I read everything as a writer. So I'm always looking for technique and you know how the thing works. And this is a masterful collection. I could not put the book down one night, and I tried to get to sleep by 10 o'clock, but I just kept reading. After 10, I didn't sleep until 11, and the next day I paid for it, but it was so worth it because the stories are so good. So, in particular, the story Overture, also the story Nightlight, that Leslie is going to read from in a minute or so. So just a couple of things that I admire about her writing is that Leslie, I think you're really good at suspense and drawing out the character development. So several protagonists go through major changes in the stories, and when you get to them, you don't feel like, where did that come from, or how did that happen? No, it's like you take us by the hand and you move very slowly so that when we get to that end, it's believable to us. So I wanted to say that, and I also wanted to say that I have already started sharing these stories with my students. Yeah, just to use them as teaching tools because they are so fabulous. So that's saying a lot. Okay, so Leslie's going to read to us from the story Nightlight.
How does it sound? It'll be interesting trying to do this and read, though. Okay. So I wanted to let you know that, that I'm dedicating this reading to a dear friend of mine. And I'm going to read a brief introduction, a brief dedication to her, and then I'm going to read from Nightlight. I want to dedicate this reading to my dear friend. I'm going to cry. Robin Coma Puakea Lee Dordefalvi, who passed away just over 2 years ago here in Bend. I would never have come to Bend in the first place if it weren't for Robin, nor would I be here now. She was here for the book tour of my first book, Journey into Motherhood, back in 1996, and I feel she is with us now. I met Robin in high school in Honolulu when we were both 15, and we remained close friends. Robin, an award-winning landscape architect, worked with the Deschutes National Forest for 3 decades and was one of a group of leaders on the Bend 2030 Visioning Committee, among a slew of other achievements. Just as importantly, she was the link between a wide range of people, both at work and in her personal life, keeping dozens of us connected, prioritizing friendships over everything else. Some of her friends, as well as her longtime husband, are here tonight. We all miss her terribly. No replacement for that wit and grace, for that generous heart. I was especially touched when, knowing she would not live much longer, she asked to read the manuscript of my book, which had not yet found a publisher. She loved the stories, though by then she could barely talk. That meant the world to me, that she carried my characters with her in her last days, a true heart to heart. That's for Robin.
Yeah.
When I was reading, it felt like there was are you hearing that too? It sounds fine? Okay. Okay, good. Because for a writer, every sound of every word, every syllable, every letter is important. So I want you to hear all of it. Okay. So Robin's here. So I'm going to read, this is a long short story called Nightlight. And Ellen really particularly loved it and asked that I read from this particular story, which on my whole book tour, I've been done at least 12 or 14 readings. This is the first time I'm reading Nightlight. It's a little more difficult to comprehend. Let's see what happens. Nightlight. Oh, one more thing. I always forget. I always ask my audience to close their eyes, or invite them to close their eyes if they want to. You can look at me if you want, reading, but if you close your eyes, it's a way to sort of enter into the narrative dream that I've created for you. So it's up to you. You can try it if you like. Nightlight. Reiner slid his screwdriver down the door frame until he hit the deadbolt. Pissed that he'd once again given in to his wife and was actually breaking into their neighbor's house. The old widow, who had lived there alone, had died 4 months before, but yesterday evening, parking the car, Beth had noticed a suspicious light, a lamp, she had said, coming from the basement apartment. What if there's a burglar in there? Or a crazy person? One tossed cigarette? She didn't have to say it. Flames would rip through their conjoined wooden houses faster than any fireman could strap on his hat. Reiner had scoffed at her suggestion to call the police. In the tiny German farming village where he'd grown up, people took such matters into their own hands. Still, he had tried to avoid the unpleasant task. Maybe it was just the moon's reflection in a mirror, he had said. But Beth persisted until he agreed to investigate. Now the wind stung his face and cut at his neck. He tried thrusting the screwdriver in at different angles, but the bolt refused to budge. In the distance, St. Peter's bells rang out more times than there were hours on a clock. Beth and 6-year-old Mac Marlowe had just headed there for Sunday Mass, the two of them skipping down the sidewalk in their dress-up coats. "We'll be back for lunch," Beth had called out gaily as she escorted their son onto a path she unabashedly believed would one day lead him through the pearly gates. The small boy, lagging, had waved one last time, then vanished with his mother around the corner. As Reiner wrangled with the latch, he felt a lurch in his gut, as if his wife and son were really gone, as if he had already lost them. Reiner glanced toward the street, quickly scanning the rows of prim San Francisco Edwardians on either side. Struck suddenly by the fairy tale quality of the two identically constructed facades in front of him, his and the old widow's, the one tidy and brightly trimmed, the other in near ruin. Convinced the street was empty, he heaved his bulk against the old widow's front door. It jerked open a few inches and stopped short. Reiner squeezed his head in. The living room was crammed floor to ceiling with stacks of moldy newspapers, unidentifiable items in plastic bags, a clutter of gutted cardboard boxes, everywhere the black confetti of mice. He covered his nose against the stench and shoved his body in, kicking the door shut behind him. Inside, everything seemed to be stirring. Shredded curtains fluttered in and out of ill-fitting windows. Faded photos lifted into the air and were tossed like tiny kites. All last night, the west wind had barreled down Twin Peaks and rammed Reiner's house with so much vigor the entire structure seemed to shift its weight. But here, where joists had weakened, nothing was protected. Reiner pressed through the towers of rubbish, afraid he would run into some vile thing, a dead cat or rat, but the hoarding he found was worse. Memory upon memory never dispatched. A desk lamp with its dangling bent arm, a herd of analog TVs, porcelain men in striped pants, a human tooth. Down the narrow hall from the living room was a child's room. Monopoly Clue pieces lay strewn over scattered piles of 1940s Newbery books. Off to the right, a plastic crate had been stuffed with children's shoes, ballet slippers, and cowboy boots. Among them, a pair of stuffed white baby dress shoes with laces identical to the ones he and Beth had once bought for Marlo. He thought of his son now, sitting at catechism, his hands folded in his lap, reciting his answers. The boy must be straining to grasp the same doctrine Reiner had had to memorize as a child. Salvation as fact, the certainty of mercy and redemption, all a grandiose lie. One day he would tell him. Methodically, Reiner inspected each room of the abandoned flat, feeling more desolate. The more impenetrable the clutter, the more dogged he became, as if the circuitry of his mind were embedded in the grooves and surfaces of the old widow's things. In the kitchen, C's candy boxes sat stacked on countertops. One was open, the oxidized chocolate snug in her little crenellated cups. At the back wall, he discovered a door rusted shut. He shouldn't have leaned against it. It sprang open. If he hadn't grabbed the jamb, he would have fallen 30 feet. This must be what Marlo jokingly called the nowhere door. The second-story door that once led to stairs down to the widow's backyard. They could see it from their back balcony. The collapsed landing and stairs lay now in shambles below him, as if sliced away from the house. Off the kitchen, on the wall of a dark stairwell, Reiner was surprised to see giant letters scrawled in black. He touched a ragged letter B, the ink still wet. Alert to his original mission, he listened, but there was no sound or sign of who had done it. More baffling still, he realized, stepping back and seeing the sentence in its entirety, was that this was a Heidegger quote from Seindun's site. He recognized it even in translation. It said, "What is still possible? Thinking that seeks to grasp the truth of being, starting from the monstrous sight to which we find ourselves riveted." At 15, Reiner had read and reread the famous book in the attic of his father's Rheinhessen farmhouse, unreservedly taking each sentence to heart. Now here Heidegger was, his postulation appearing in the widow's deserted house. Reiner laughed out loud at the absurdity of it, then fell silent, overcome by the grim irony of the quote itself. Yes, here it fucking was, the monstrous sight, the relentlessness of decay, the insidious dullness that settles in. He was literally standing in the thick of it. The once cherished words felt threatening now, as if the house were taunting him, or the great philosopher himself were calling him out for having squandered that sliver of hope. "What is still possible?" someone said behind him. Reiner spun around to see a kid in his late teens, almost as tall as Reiner, but nearly half his width, his dark hair short and jagged, as if he had cut it with a dull blade of a knife. He seemed to have many layers of clothes, all black. "Who the fuck are you?" Reiner asked. I was about to ask the same thing. "I live next door, but you, let's just say I've got a lifetime lease." He was grinning, missing some teeth. He extended a hand. His fingernails were long and oddly yellow, buffed with grime. "Federico," he said, introducing himself. He smelled like mildew and stale sweat. "German, right?" he said. "I hear the accent." He came closer. "Hey, they say Germans know Heidegger better than NASCAR drivers know Daytona." "You wrote that?" Reiner said, incredulous, pointing to the graffiti. No one at Reiner's nanotech company talked about anything but stock options and the latest thriller. At home, it was God's grace, Pokemon cards, and coupons, but not thought. Never an idea. Over the years, Reiner had replaced the poetry and philosophy books he'd once kept stacked on his night table with nano letters and a journal for nanophotonics. Personally, he said, I always felt Heidegger was wrong, the kid said, but the idea intrigued me. He lit a cigarette. Who knows, he said, there probably is no escape from the monstrous sight. Look at all this crap. But what do I know? Maybe there is. He threw the match to the floor and put it out with his bandaged foot. One tossed cigarette, Beth had warned. You can't stay here, Reiner said. My wife, hey, it's winter, man. The place is empty. How'd you even get in? Reiner's left shoulder ached from ramming the front entrance. The back had no exit. If a pencil fits under a door, the kid said, so can a mouse. No collarbone, collapsible rib cage. The only limitation is the skull. Come on, man. The side alley door was unlocked, he said. Scheisse. There it was. Reiner cursed from birth to do everything the hard way, or against his will, which was equally punishing. Plowing his father's field with a hoe when he could have used a tractor, taking up engineering when math was his weakest suit. Beth had convinced him to give up philosophy for engineering so they'd, quote, own more than 2 spoons and 2 plates. He'd forsaken his country. He'd rented a house beyond their means in the neighborhood where Beth had grown up and taken a job he didn't really want, stacking graphene layers into carbon nanofibers in Silicon Valley with his grueling commute in order to pay for it. St. Peter's bells rang the hour. Less strident this time. A call to noon mass. Look, kid, if I were you, I'd get the hell out of here by tonight. Reiner worked his way back to the front door, anxious to exit the Sturm und Drang of the dead woman's house and return to the composure of his tree-lined street. But once he did, the row of identical houses looked fake, the scene as dull and flat as a still life. Re-entering his home, waiting for Beth and Marlo in their well-appointed living room, he had the strange sensation that he, too, had been painted there, a tall, sturdy, successful man, relaxing with Der Spiegel on his couch. When Beth returned from Mass, she looked ebullient, carrying her prayer book under her arm, her cheeks flushed from singing. Did you find anything? She asked, after sending Marlo to his room to change out of his church clothes. Renner looked down at his large hands. If he had believed once that it was possible, through thinking, to escape the bane of existence, to slip through the gap of what he wanted the world to mean and what it was, he didn't now. You were mistaken, Beth, he said. There is no danger. Thank you.
Thank you. In that story, Reiner takes a series of small risks, and I don't want to spoil the story for anybody, but eventually takes a bigger risk. And when we talked, you said that you were drawn to people who take big risks. Can you say more about that, and also what other kinds of people or characters are you drawn to?
I am drawn to people who court danger on their road to themselves, who may go to extremes to find out who they really are, or to live out their authentic passions, or to find out what that passion might even be. So there's that. Some of the pieces that deal with women and the society's assault on women's bodies, there's extremes there because there's violence. There's a story, Overture, that is, there's a woman who's abused and bruised, and she uses opera as a way to try to survive. There's also, it's been pointed out to me that a lot of my characters are longing to be someone else or somewhere else or do something else than what they're doing. And I at one point thought of calling the whole collection exit strategies because they were all kind of in different ways, very different ways. There's really a range of characters here. And I don't know, I don't unconsciously, but I myself have traveled around the world. I've had the fortune to spend time in a lot of different countries, live in a lot of different cities. We're just hanging out with all kinds of people, Puerto Rican, Cuban, Hawaiian, Argentinian, African American, ethnically white, and from different European countries, you name it. Old and young and so on, and they've been all my people that I've loved. So I write about them, that's the range. I'm trying to think of, so what other aspects of character, I think that just that range and that willingness to sort of go all the way at least try to go all the way, even if it wouldn't be condoned by other people. Yeah.
Yeah, I noticed in the collection that there is quite a range of places and different kinds of characters, and one experience that I had reading the collection was oh wow, now we're in Southeast Asia, and there's a character, Valai, is that how you say her name? I admired that. There was there were settings in the Western U.S. and, as I said, Southeast Asia and San Francisco, all over the place, and that's quite admirable. So you are a poet, or you were a poet? Once a poet, always a poet. You all may have noticed some lovely language and figures of speech in the reading that Leslie just did. So everywhere, the confetti of mice, photos like little kites. You teach the art, you told me you teach the art of quote unquote languaging. How has that shaped you as a writer and a teacher?
Yeah, so I wrote poetry when I was a child, and realized the power of words as a young person, and of language perhaps as song, and so wasn't really drawn to nonfiction as a result. But so I wrote poetry, and I did study poetry, and also I loved language in general. When I went to Italy, or with a university program, I learned Italian, so parlo italiano, and I studied Italian poets, translated Italian poets. Any language I can kind of get a little piece of, I try to play. Just languages are just amazing. How do we even come up with the words that we have? In the very beginning, at one time we were just like groaning and ugging and and then how it took a while to come up with these words, these metaphors for things, sounds that meant, represented, signified. So I think language is very amazing, and I think that poets are the shamans of language all around the world and all through time. And that's why I teach people in my creative writing classes, which I've been teaching for over 30 years, to know what a poet knows about language as a foundation for all of their writing. So I do have that sensibility of the poet. And what does that mean? It means things like language has texture, it has music, and there's what bright sounds like and means and feels, but how the word bright it responds in your body, jiggles around in your body, vibrates, is different than dark. And L words and W words and the Hawaiian language with its 12 breathy vowels and no hard sounds coming in the beginning creates a language when you hear it that is in fact full of breath. The aloha, what does that mean? I don't remember. It's something about the breath. All those words are breath. So really getting to love language, learning to love it as a medium the way ceramicists might love their clay, or a dancer her body. I thought it was important for my students and for me to love language that way, to really fall in love with it as our medium, not take it for granted, and hear its music, feel its music, allow the echoes to occur in it. And so I, after years and years, have developed a musical ear so that my choices are often musical ones. You know, when the word, and there's so many ways you can say something, and the words come up musically. And I also record all my work as I'm working on it to hear and things that might need just by listening.
I noticed that you read it beautifully, and you read it like a poet. Did you guys notice that? A real attention and sort of love for every single word and the pauses, and just as you said. So for aspiring writers out there, always read your work aloud and hear how it sounds. Leslie wrote a piece of nonfiction for LitHub, which is an online literary magazine, and it was about how to create a linked collection of stories, which The Man with 8 Pair of Legs is. And how did you put such a collection together, after the fact or while you were writing?
No, I did exactly what you're not supposed to do, because this is not linked the way the New York publishers want. They want novels, they want linked stories with the same characters repeated, and this is all over the map. So the New York publishers that my agent sent it to, they loved the characters, the humor, the writing, all these things, but we don't think we can sell it. So that was great when Alice Sebold said she loved it, and everyone at Sebold Books, the publisher, loved it. So that was something that was interesting to just be reminded of, that, for a writer, I was just reading yesterday in the Writer's Chronicle, the woman who's being featured, the author who's being featured, sent her memoir out and was rejected 100 times, she said, before, and then she has this whole range of awards now for her memoir, right? But it's just a matter of ultimately having your work, if you've worked on it, like I was sharing, I worked on it over 6 or 7 years. I don't have very many stories under my belt. I started fiction in my 50s. I went to Bennington and got an MFA in my 50s in fiction, and I started learning how to write fiction, and I cut my teeth on these stories. These are they. I just stayed committed to them. I never gave up on them. I wanted to puzzle out when it needed more time to know the characters. I needed to give it all that time. So I wrote the stories that I just needed to write. And what I wrote about in that article is how, at some point, the agent too, so what's the theme? What's going to hold it all together? How are we going to sell this thing? And this mentor of mine at Tin House in Portland, at Reed, said, "What about the body? And I'm like, oh my God, just what the body. I realized that my body, which had been cut into, broken in half in multiple places, assaulted, invaded, objectified, and had given birth to 2 10-pound children without any epidurals or anything like that. It's natural birth. Who had been a varsity track runner and a modern dancer, looking at my body in the mirrors, wall-to-wall mirrors. I didn't think about it because it was my body, but my body had been talking to me the whole time. And so the body is really important in all these stories, and ways our bodies are marked by the past. Marked with heroin tracks, marked with lesions, marked with scars, with bruises, with tattoos, and invisibly. Those are all visible things, but also invisibly. One of the characters is marked invisibly through intergenerational trauma. She's an Armenian woman whose grandmother was in Anatolia during the slaughter of the Armenians and the pushing of the Armenians on their march to Syria, where a lot of them died also. Those are some of the things that came together. And so, I said, well, that's cool. So, and then the man that appears on legs, my God, the body is really important. I don't want to give anything away, but legs are part of the body. The man has 8 pairs of legs. And the woman in that title story, Harriet, is like sort of hyper aware of her body to the point where she can listen to her own blood circulating through her body and feels like firing squads under her skin, and experiences her body almost as a mannequin, she says, until the man with 8 pairs of legs touches her in a certain way. Those kind of tie it together. And then one last thing I just want to mention is I found in Thoreau this epigram: I stand in awe of my body. This matter to which I am bound has become so strange to me. And I thought, perfect. Just to help. Oh, and one other thing I just want to mention is that I had all these stories, and then the same woman who said, what about the body? I'm like, oh, okay. Thank you. She also said, why don't you write one more story that really focuses on the body? And I wrote The Hermit's Tattoo. And everything else had taken 6 years, working on it. And The Hermit's Tattoo I wrote, in a weekend. I did keep working on it a little bit, but I'm just saying. And that just put it all together. And then what someone realized later is that the last story, Triptych, where there's a painter, her gallerist, she's doing this series, this Arctic series, and the gallerist says, you need one more painting to bring it all together. And then someone else later, that's exactly what you ended up doing, with the Hermit's Tattoo. It was there's always synchronicities of this kind. When you're writing from your heart, when you have what I call the writing faith, which just runs deeper than belief in oneself, then everything's going to come out okay.
Wonderful. Also in that LitHub article, you wrote, quote, together, these fictions became my way of understanding something bigger than myself, unquote. What is that something?
That inarticulate.
I think it is hard to articulate what it is that's bigger than the self. It's like if you read all the stories, you just have to kind of feel it, because I don't think I can really define it exactly. But it was completely integrating, and perhaps it is something about what I was saying to you before about the ways humans create pattern to understand ourselves. You know, because I use the metaphor of the constellation in that article in LitHub. Because there's all these stars out there. And it's like, similarly, I have all these bodies. I mean, not bodies, yeah, bodies and stories in myself that just exist. And then we look at the stars, and then we say, oh, those 3 stars, those look, they could be a belt. And so let's think, you know, what's one, some god or gods, that could be Orion's belt. It's a hunter, you know, and this way of managing, you know, the absolute miracle and mystery of all that there is, you know. But that doesn't solve that mystery, but it allows us to be in dialogue, I think, with that mystery.
I hear something about bringing order to the chaos. And that very human thing to look for patterns and things that relate and through lines, which is helpful to hear, you know, for those of us who are also writing.
Yeah.
I was surprised by the endings of several stories. I didn't see them coming, and I don't mean that in a negative way at all. Can you talk about the choices that you made or make to end your stories?
I know that when I read, I really love a novel or a story that just ends with me going, wow. And have that just this resonance where things are not tied up. You know, I wasn't interested in creating a certain ending. Well, another thing that's important is that some people say, you know, I know the ending, I just have to now write to get there. I'm not like that. I mean, I have no idea how it's going to end. I mean, like right now with Overture, is Margie going to get away from that man? Is she going to get away at the end or not? I really don't know. There are a lot of things leading to the fact that she might, and I know a lot of people hope she does. But it's not clear. I mean, will Reiner, in the end, leave this family and go with Federico and have a whole different life that maybe satisfies the intellect that he's wanted to be nurtured and hasn't nurtured? Is it strong enough to take him away from his child? I don't know. But I think that having the contradictions and the tensions there still at the end feels important to me. You know, with Tasmanians, all these trees are cut down, and Cedric is coming on his little car, and how is he going to react to that? All the eucalyptus, the tar of the eucalyptus in the air, scenting the air, and they're like slaughtered bodies, which in my mind was sort of a replication of what the Turks had done to their Armenians, and this was this woman who had done it to her own trees. So, and then as a poet too, I guess, with poetry has often great leaps, there's a lot of omission. You know, say so much. And I'm interested in that too. The erotic sentence, the seduction of plot, you know, not giving too much away, so there's always that Scheherazade, you know, I want to hear what happens next so that the woman doesn't get beheaded, you know. And there's a certain urgency that she feels, but we as writers can feel similar urgencies about how we want our stories to end up progressing and how we want to leave their characters, story, and the readers at the end with this sort of, you know, disequilibrium.
Thanks. Julie, how are we doing? We want to leave about 15 minutes for Q&A. Are we doing okay?
We should probably do that now. It's about 10 minutes to 7 right now.
Oh, okay.
But
Okay.
totally up to you guys.
All right.
Yeah.
So I'll just jump to my last question, and then we'll go to Q&A. And that is there anything else that you would like to say to all of us about the book? And then we'll move to Q&A.
I think especially people who are writers, just how important it is to be patient with your work, to have faith that you are always going to write what you need to write, so you never have to be afraid of the white page, the blank page. I think you asked me, like, what are my hopes for the book? I mean, after all that work, I just want as many people as possible to read my book and share it, and my friend Jane, she came in, I haven't seen her in a long time, she bought 4 books, and she's like, I want to give one to this person and that person. I'm like, yeah, that's what I want for my book. And I just want people to be patient with them as well, with the stories. Someone said they read the first one. Actually, it was my sister, I realized. And she said, and I just wanted to sort of be with that for a while. I didn't want to just go right into the next one. And I think I would hope that you would take your time with the book. They're dense. I chose short fiction as a poet because I love density, I love layering, echoes, musical scoring. I want, I can imagine, one person just read it again. They wanted to experience it again. And then another person said he read it, he had to read it again. And I love that. I love that. I hope there's a lot there for you to absorb and feel and experience. I hope each story is an experience.
Great, thank you. So, not only did Alice Sebold write a blurb for this book, but so did Anthony freaking Dorr. and other luminaries as well. So, okay, I will give the mic back to Leslie, and how many people have a question?
How do you get someone like Anthony Dorr to say nice things about your writing?
Well, so one thing that I really recommend to all of my students is going to summer writing workshops. So I've been to the Napa Valley Writing Workshop at least 3 times. I've been to Tin House 3 times. Portland, it's not so far. Bread Loaf in the East Coast, Juniper in Massachusetts also, and so on. And the point being that there's incredible faculty. And I always just chose people whose work I loved if I could get into their workshop. And fortunately, some of them love my work too. Stuart Dybeck was the judge he chose Nightlight as a first prize award. And when the coolest thing was, that was anonymous. And then I actually went to a workshop maybe a year and a half later to learn from him. He was the teacher. And I said, Beth, by the way, I'm the one who wrote that story you chose. He said, you're kidding, I thought that was written by a man. And I'm like, fucking A. All right. Yeah, and my Armenian one was, I had an Armenian family read it, and the mother of my friend, who was actually Armenian, the other one was Armenian American, thought it was written by an Armenian. And these are the kind of things that mean a lot to a writer, believe me. You're writing fiction, but you're writing truth. And there's a disabled character, and I'm pretty able. I have some hip issues, but and I did a lot of research and worked with people. In fact, one of them was a gold medalist for the Paralympics. Actually read it. When he gave me a thumbs up, I was like, okay, cool. That's good. So, getting back to that question. So that's where you meet people, and then if they really love your work, then you can later ask them for a blurb. And I have a great story about this, particularly since you mentioned it. He did really like my work. They wrote a beautiful letter to me in the workshop, and then it was 2 years later that I asked for a blurb because it took a while. And he wrote back this email that said something like he'd had a kidney stone or something, and he was in bed, and that it was in pain, and you know he had no promise that he would read it. I mean, he said yes, have them send it to me. But he wrote back and he read it. He said he couldn't imagine having anything better to do while he was recovering from his kidney stone than reading my book. He thought it was cool, and as he writes, they're sexy, and he thought The Tasmanians was the best story he'd read dealing with genocidal trauma and that he could remember, and on and on. And it was like, you know that my house was not silent at that point, because I was screaming when I got that email. So that was very exciting, very exciting. He wrote a beautiful blurb here, you know, really amazing.
Who else? Questions?
How do you receive? Does it come in from the side? Do you sit? I mean, what's your receptor to the great wash of possibility that can come through? The great unknown.
The great unknown. Well, I am an imagination activist. I teach and aerobicize the imagination with all my students. So I need to keep my own imagination active. And so that's all part of it. And another thing that I do is I really work hard to get time away, totally unrestricted time. I've been to Playa. Are some of you familiar in the south of Oregon? Summer Lake. It's Playa at Summer Lake. I've been there twice. I'm going to go again in the fall. I also went to Ucross in Wyoming for a month. But when I'm in San Francisco, there's a place I go. I befriended the Dominican sisters, and it's a convent that became a retreat center. But for a minimal amount, I've been able to stay in those rooms. And you know, it's really no offense to my husband who's sitting here, but he's a great guy, and you know, he's very supportive of my work. But to be alone and have my own schedule with my own imagination and my own crazy ideas, to do research, you know, on the internet, often different aspects of a character, different things about the history that is related to, because none of my characters are in a vacuum; they're all in a historical context. You know, and all these things start firing. These connections get made, and you know, I can't, you know, make dinner. You know, I just want to. I might not even eat. There's no point in eating at that point, you know, because I'm being fed so mightily by all these ideas that are coming to me, and so that's for me, having that kind of open, sacred time to go deep and deeper is important. I mean, I know Harriet gets to a really dark place, but I also need to be able to go to a really dark place, you know, if I need to. And I also, one other thing from that question is that for 20 years I didn't write seriously. I brought out my two sons who were 10 years apart, and I taught a lot of classes of creative writing, and I gave to others. So, and I had ideas though that were percolating that I held on to, and some of those are in this book. Some of those ideas.
Does anyone else have a question? Yeah.
I think one of my favorite stories was the last one, Triptych.
Uh-huh.
And it was interesting how you had them each speaking from different voices. You had
Yeah.
Grady, and then you had Cash and Lynn.
Yeah.
And I just thought that was interesting how that kind of seemed almost like a triptych of itself,
Yeah.
kind of as a metaphor for the triptych that
Of the
she
painting.
of the painting.
No, I didn't realize in the beginning either. Those are things that happen sometimes. But that was the did a workshop with Anthony Joy at Toon House in an earlier stage, and she's really lovely. I took out another thing, I mean, look at it, still a lot on it. But that was one of the things that he talked about that I loved.
Oh, just,
Can you hear me? That I loved that he taught, you know, because it was like basically screw the rules. You know, that you always are going to hear all the rules. And like one rule is you can't change point of view in your story. You know, and here I was with 3 points of view, using this as an example. Well, you can't do these things unless you can get it to work. But that's why it took time. There's certain things I did that you can't do, but I was stubborn and said, well, yeah, if you're telling me I can't do something, I'm gonna figure out how to do it. and if it takes 5 years, it takes 5 years to figure it out. And in that one, not only is it 3 voices, the first one is in the first person, Lynn, so it's her just talking. And then Grady is in the third person, close. So you're kind of inside him, but you have the distance of the third person. And Cash, the boy, is in the second person, talking to you about how he sees the world from his first grade position. His, yeah. So.
And the Thunder in Illinois, is that the name of the story? I thought that one was so, I mean, it's like this dance between these two people. And I don't know, I just thought it was very, very artfully done. They're playing that game together, and they're talking around things, and it just, I don't know, it was just very fun to read.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Good. It was like that's the kind of thing. So I set things up for myself. In that case, it's like, can I write a whole story with 2 people playing a game one night? And that's all. So the present time story is them playing a game over maybe 3 hour period. That's it. But obviously, so much more.
Yes.
And I guess the challenge there was to be able to move in and out of past to present, past to present. And allow that weave to occur. That's
Well, all right. I think that wraps us up. Again, thank you everybody for being here. Grab a copy of the book, get it signed, and we'll be able to check you out at that register. You're also welcome to shop a little while you're here in the store. We won't kick you out right away. And then I hope you'll join us for some more of our events in our new space. So thank you so much for being here.
thank you, Julie, for having both of us. So I'll let you know that after the signing, anyone who wants to can walk next to a Washington Grill, and they're going to see if they can find a table for anyone who would like to hang out and have a drink or a bite to eat.
Awesome.
But do let us know, like, how many